Hello again, this is Alyssa Klein, Minnesota VRS Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Specialist, and with me is
Sarah Sundin, Community Partnerships Team.
We are here to take you through Pre-ETS training for VRS Community Partners, module number 3, which will review the Minnesota VRS Pre-ETS service delivery structure. So here's our agenda for this training module. We're going to start with some background information. Then we'll have an overview of Pre-ETS service delivery, and then give you resources. So we'll start with some background information on how the Minnesota Pre-ETS service delivery structure got to where it is at today. You may recall this slide from module number 1, which explains that Pre-ETS first became a thing when the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act was signed in 2014. Some have said that WIOA has provided some of the most momentous changes to the VR program since its inception over 100 years ago. Furthermore, it is said that the creation of Pre-ETS is at the top of the list of those momentous changes. Why? Reason number 1 is that Pre-ETS is a whole new set of to the VR program. Reason number 2 is that Pre-ETS are provided in part to a whole new set of customers, which are the students who are potentially eligible for our program. I say all of that to help give some perspective. The VR program has had over 100 years of providing and traditional vocational rehabilitation services. On the other hand, there's only been a few years for everyone from the Rehabilitation Services Administration down to the state VR programs, and then down to all of the VRS staff and partners working at the local level to learn about and try out pre-employment transition services. In other words, we are really still at the beginning stages of this new programming. This slide further exemplifies the Pre-ETS journey we have undertaken here in Minnesota. I've divided the course we have charted so far into 3 stages. Stage 1 was from 2014 when WIOA was signed through 2016 when we received our federal regulations. The regulations gives states the blueprint with which to build state policy and practices. So essentially, during those first 2 years, the Minnesota VR program was just dipping our toes in the water with Pre-ETS while we were waiting for the instructions from the feds on how we were to carry things out. After receiving the regulations, stage 2 began. We weren't entirely sure the best way to provide services to potentially eligible services, so we started with the request for proposals, which offered grant funds to community partners to provide these services. And we used the existing general VR services within your PT contracts to authorize Pre-ETS for students who were eligible for the VR program. Well, that only lasted 2 years until we learned from RSA that we weren't allowed to have grants and that we needed to have specific Pre-ETS services on our PT contracts. So that is when stage 3, our course correction, began in 2019. Oops. We had to end the grants and instead hire Pre-ETS representatives to enroll potentially eligible students. And we also had to ask you as our community partners to amend your contracts to include Pre-ETS services. And that takes us to this day. Really, we have had just a short time with our current Pre-ETS model. And so why, again, am I taking time to review all of this? The hope is that it can actually put you a little more at ease. You may be feeling confused about what Pre-ETS are and how to deliver them. You may wish that the referrals were coming your way, or that there were more coming your way, or that VRS staff had more direction for you. But the reality is that you are not alone. Pre-ETS is essentially still brand new for everybody. RSA, VRS staff, schools, counties, and community partners are all still learning the ins and outs of Pre-ETS, and we're all trying to figure out the best approaches for working together so that we can provide the best services to students. So that leads me to one last slide that was also shared in the first module. Pre-ETS truly requires more collaboration than ever before. And I wholeheartedly believe that as long as we're all working closely together, that we'll eventually figure all of this out. Let's take a closer look at today's Minnesota pre-ETS delivery structure. As we have reviewed, we have services available to students who are eligible for VR and to students who are potentially eligible. This slide compares and contrasts these two types of services. The services for potentially eligible students are just the 5 required pre-ETS services, and that is all. Ideally, these students would be referred to our community partners to receive these services, and they would be provided in a group setting. However, of course, they can be provided one-on-one if students need that as well. Students eligible for VR, on the other hand, can also receive the 5 required pre-ETS services, but also more comprehensive VR services. VRS counselors often provide many of the pre-ETS in a one-on-one setting, but they can also refer eligible students to a group or other services provided by you as our community partners. The target population for services to potentially eligible students are those that are younger, like 9th and 10th graders, and also those that are in 11th grade and older that may not need VR services or that may go on the VR waitlist because their disability is less significantly impacting. The target population for traditional VR services would be older students, typically those in 11th grade and above, and those with more significantly impacting disabilities. As for how to qualify, it is fairly easy to qualify for services as potentially eligible students. VRS just needs to receive verification that the student has a disability without even getting information about that disability, that they are in an education program, and that they are between the ages of 14 through 21. As for traditional or general VR services, a student needs to apply, be determined eligible based on having a disability that will impact them in employment, and typically with our waitlist that they need to have 3 or more functional limitations, and that if they had 2 or fewer functional limitations, they would go on the waitlist. Lastly, with the length of service, those receiving services as a potentially eligible student can receive services until they are no longer in school or until they turn age 22. Unfortunately, the pre-ETS services must abruptly end when either of those things occur. So VRS staff will be mindful of that when providing services. Of course, those who are eligible for VR can receive services as long as they need them. Ideally, VRS would be side by side with the student through high school, after graduation, and all the way until they have successfully transitioned into competitive integrated employment. Pre-ETS representatives serve students who are potentially eligible for VR, and VR counselors serve students who are eligible for VR. And here's how their roles are the same. They both manage a caseload. They both do outreach to schools, ideally together. They both provide pre-ETS to students with disabilities. They both coordinate and authorize for pre-ETS services. And of course, they are both an integral part of the VRS team. And here's how their roles are different. The pre-ETS representative only provides pre-ETS services, while the VR counselor provides pre-ETS and VR services. The pre-ETS representative only serves potentially eligible students, while the VR counselor only serves eligible students. The pre-ETS representative provides broad outreach to many schools assigned to the team, whereas the VR counselor is a lead representative from VRS in typically a smaller number of assigned schools. The pre-ETS representative provides more lighter touch services, while the VR counselor provides more intensive services. And lastly, the pre-ETS representative does not create an employment plan with the student, whereas the VR counselor does create an employment plan with each student. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Both VRS PREETS reps and VR counselors will develop and foster relationships with the schools they're assigned to. This link will take you to a page on the DEED VRS website where you can find the counselor and PREETS rep assigned to each school. VRS staff will have a plan for PREETS provision with each school. They will discuss how to make referrals, what classroom needs they have, a calendar of days and times that VRS staff will be available to students, how they can have ongoing communication, and partner together. But schools aren't the only entities that can refer students to VRS. Families and staff from other community programs can also make referrals. Once a student is referred, initial paperwork must be completed. For general VR services, the student must complete the VR application. For PREETS, potentially eligible students, the student completes the PREETS application. Again, you will see how the process goes for each of the two types of service. For students who are potentially eligible, the process is much simpler. Students complete the PREETS application. A PREETS rep verifies disability, age, and student status. The next steps, PREETS are provided as needed until the student is no longer in school or turns age 22. For students who are eligible, again, the process and services are more comprehensive. The student applies for VR services. The counselor determines eligibility and priority for services. Then they have to complete the assessment of VR needs, an employment plan, and then the PREETS and the regular VR services are provided as needed until that student is successfully employed. Keep in mind that any potentially eligible student can apply for regular VR services at any time. In particular, VRS staff will assist the student in doing so when a certain need arises that can't be provided with PREETS services alone. The PREETS rep and the counselor will work together to assist with this process so that the handoff goes smoothly. And the nice thing is that the student can continue to receive PREETS services all through the initial stages of the VR process. This slide reviews some tips that can help a student or anyone on their team make a decision about when applying for regular VR services and when it might be appropriate. First, the student reaching graduation or age 22, and do they have additional support needs? That may be a good time to consider applying. Or an application may be appropriate earlier in the student's high school career if a particular need arises. A good example is when a student needs work-based learning coaching and they aren't able to get it through their school. It is important to keep in mind that it takes time for a student to apply, for eligibility to be determined, and to get an employment plan in place. This visual shows the 3 possible service paths a student might take. First, student A starts out receiving PREETS from a PREETS representative. This student only needs PREETS and thus they never apply for regular VR services. Second, student B also receives PREETS as a potentially eligible student, but because they need more services beyond PREETS, they apply for VR. And if by chance the student went on the VR waitlist, they could still continue to receive PREETS services. Student C applies directly for traditional VR services, and if they are found eligible, they receive both PREETS and other VR services from the VR counselor. In the course of providing services, either the PREETS rep or the VRS counselor will refer students to you, our community partners. We will ask you to provide PREETS services as needed. In Module 4, we will give more details on the referral, authorizing, reporting, and invoicing process as it relates to pre-employment transition services. We will finish up this training module with sharing a few more resources that you can refer to. First, VRS has new resources available to help with outreach. There are 2 new videos that we encourage you all to watch. The first link here is a 3-minute video for students which explains VRS student career services. The second video is for schools, which explains the benefit of and the process for strong partnerships. We also have 3 new flyers. The first is for students, and you will see that we don't use the term pre-employment transition services in the marketing, since it obviously means nothing to students. Instead, we are marketing VRS, Student Career Services. We also use the same flyer to market to students who may be potentially eligible or eligible for services. The second and third flyers on this slide are for businesses. The first is called Youth Connections. It is a broad marketing piece that explains all the different ways that businesses can engage with the youth we serve. And the second explains how short-term work experiences work. We also have a page on our website dedicated to resources for high school staff. Of particular note is the Memorandum of Understanding between DEED and the Minnesota Department of Education, which outlines our commitment to providing services to students with disabilities. There is also a partnership guide, which explains the roles of all partners and gives additional resources. And that concludes training module number 3. Again, please feel free to contact any of us listed on this slide if you have any questions. And thank you for your time.